Hey, this is Tyler Franklin with Tidewater Seed. I'm in Eastern Virginia today. The talk of the town right now is the drought. I see severe drought impacting corn somewhere, at least in Virginia, every single year. I haven't seen a drought this severe, this widespread in the past 10 years. So really from North Carolina right on up to Delaware, we need rain in most areas right now. We need it bad and we need it quick. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, the impact it's having, and more importantly, what we can do as farmers to prevent the severity of the stress. Because in dry land, East Coast production, we are going to run into drought conditions, if not every year on some farms. And there is a lot of management that we can do to prevent the impacts of that stress. And I hate it when farmers will say, well, it's all up to Mother Nature now, and they kind of turn a blind eye. But there's a lot of factors and a lot of management practices that we can do to really keep yields higher under stress conditions. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to talk about what we're seeing and what to look for in your area. Number one, corn needs water, but it's just as important as to when that water comes. So when corn is V7, V8, and thigh high, it's using about 9/100ths or up to a tenth of an inch a day. That's what that plant wants. When corn is poking tassel or trying to pollinate, it can be using 3/10 to 4/10 a day. So how much water you get is just as important as when you get that water. The worst scenario is to be under severe drought conditions at the wilting point where corn rolls up tight and trying to shed pollen. Because what happens in those scenarios is you can have silk lock in the ear. So the tassel comes out and drops pollen, but there's not enough moisture in the plant, and the plant is stressing itself so hard that it's not able to push the silks out of the ear and out of the husk in order to catch the pollen. And what happens in that scenario, if it does have silk lock, is you shed all the pollen, and then we catch a rain and the silks come out, but there's no pollen left to pollinate the kernels. If there are no kernels pollinated, there are no kernels to fill. And so somewhere in the state of Virginia, every single year, I see areas not pollinate, and those are zeros. So timing of the drought is equally important to understand as how much rain you get. One thing I really look for once I understand the growth stage and the crop demands for that particular time is the lower canopy. The lower canopy tells you a lot about the history of the dry weather stress on that plant and lack of moisture. So when you don't have enough moisture in the soil to meet that plant's demands for that day, you reach a wilting point and the plants roll up. And it usually starts at the bottom of the plant will starve water and nutrients from the lower leaves to feed the growing point in the top of the plant. So the wilting starts in the bottom of the plant. If the leaves wilt long enough, they die. And so you can always squat down in the rows and look at that lower canopy, and if the green leaves are on the ground, the stress on that plant has been very limited. I like seeing leaves on the ground. That means that plant is happy and healthy for the most part. A lot of people talk about leaves in the corn firing up. Those lower leaves are firing up from the bottom. They're dying. When you get out in the rows and you look down and you see that a lot of the lower canopy has fired up and dropped and turned brown or yellow, that's an indicator that that plant has gone through significant stress. So I'm on a spot in the field where we've had a little bit of dry weather stress, but these plants right now are not at the wilting point in this particular portion of the field. So you can see how nice and green it is. And the lower canopy has got a little bit of lower leaf discoloration. But for the most part, this looks okay. In this scenario, stress has been limited. Now, if I walk another 20 feet and get on a sandy knoll, you can see we have reached wilting point, severe wilting, and the lower canopy is fired up really bad. So even if we did get rain, and this turned, the growing point turned green and it went on growing, I can always, no matter what growth stage we're at or point in the season, I can always look at the lower canopy, and it kind of tells a story of the history of that plant and how much stress it's been through. So we will get rain. It's just a matter of when we get it and how much we get. But you can always look at that lower canopy and those lower leaves and use that as an indicator for how much that dry weather has impacted that plant, how much it has stressed that plant. I want to talk about some of the management factors that we can do that can really help limit the amount of yield reduction that we get for stress. And a lot of these things occur at planting. We want nice even emergence so the plants stress together and not compete against one another. Everybody has heard of how important even emergence is. Even emergence is the root of establishing high yield. And when you start that high yield, when you establish even emergence and you start yield high, stressors start at a higher level and they have to chop that yield down from a higher starting point. If you start off with uneven emergence and your yield has a lower ceiling, stress is chopping it from there. So number one, we want even emergence. We want less plant to plant competition and as few runt plants per acre as possible. A lot of things that go into that even emergence: planting depth, planting speed, seed placement, good seed quality. Watch your sidewall compaction and smearing. We want a nice even ride in order to get that even emergence. I was walking some fields today that were rolled up really tight, and there was a lot of sidewall smearing, which limited root growth. I want to show you what some of these plants look like. So this is a root ball from one of the plants. You can see right there, it looks somewhat normal, but if I spin it 180 degrees, you can see that a lot of that root ball only grew in one direction, which was the seed trench. This corn plant is working with about half of the roots that it should have because it was limited in early season production, early season growth. So the roots grow towards a path of least resistance, and there was sidewall smearing because of disc blade slippage, planting into wet conditions. And so this plant right now is going through more stress than it should just because of that one variable, sidewall smearing. You can also see right here, the ground is so hard and crusted in this particular place that your brace roots aren't able to penetrate the ground and are actually pushing back up rather than going down into the dirt. So we're having inadequate root formation here because of management that went on at planting. There's another plant I pulled up from another location. It's very easy for you to see here. The roots aren't able to go in the ground because the ground is so hard and crusted. So the brace roots are just growing out. So, and this was also had some sidewall smearing and planted really, really shallow. This was only planted about 3/4 of an inch deep. So improper root development here makes this plant less adapted when it goes into stress because the root system is not ideal. So those are several factors that is going to pull yield off the table and limit that plant's ability to combat dry weather that we're seeing right now. We're really getting into cover crops hot and heavy. Some of these brace roots that aren't able to go into the ground are because the ground's crusted. If we had a nice thatch of cover on top of the ground, those roots would be able to go down and penetrate. We're also seeing a lot more moisture retention and less surface evaporation and crusting where we have nice cover on top of the ground. Everywhere we've had this vetch cover crop program this year, corn looks 10 times better behind those successful management practices with vetch than it does without it. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. One, that cover crop does a good job at getting potassium into the plant. Potassium is one of the most important nutrients that we want in our corn going into stress. We can't cure drought, we want to prevent it. So we want our plants happy going into stressful environments, and potassium concentrations in the plant we want high going into drought. Potassium becomes unavailable when the ground gets dry, but that's the one nutrient that we want in the plant during stress. It helps open and close the stomata, and if we don't have enough potassium in the plants, we're not going to handle drought well, which is going to limit our ability to combat that stress when it does occur. So having good potassium levels in the plant is really going to help. There's a lot of foliar feeding products that we can use to get potassium in the plant, but we need to do all this pre-drought. We want to be preventative, not reactive, because we can't cure it. Once the stress occurs, the damage is done. So we're trying to create high yield levels, so the stress that we do have is chopping from a high level rather than a low level. And then we want to be preventative with management, that factors that we can control. So having a healthy soil, covering up that soil surface so the sun doesn't bake and crust the ground, having adequate nutrients, establishing good even emergence. Those are all factors that we can control as farmers that will limit the amount of yield impact that stresses like drought will have. So if you have any questions, we're here to help in any way that we can. Hoping and praying that everybody gets some rain over the coming days. But if we can help, let us know.